In my opinion, 2025 is the year of the zero running back strategy. The more mock drafts and actual drafts that I do, I find myself loving the teams that go wide receiver heavy early or drafting that stud tight end or quarterback early more than I do when I draft running backs early. So if you are one of those people who want to attack the other three positions early, or you're just looking for some late round running backs to add to your depth but have some upside, then I have 8 running backs going in round 7 or later that I am targeting for potential weekly starters or season-long upside. The first is an extremely easy pick to make in Tony Pollard, who's pretty much the last workhorse starter going off the board at RB28 in the 7th round in our multi-site ADP, sometimes even falling into the 8th rounds if you're on the ESPN platform. This is an egregious ADP for me for a player who has rushed for over 1,000 yards and totaled over 1,300 yards in 3 straight seasons, and he's eclipsed 300 touches in back-to-back seasons too, totaling over 250 carries and at least 40 receptions in 2023 and 2024. He's not sexy, but he's going to get the volume and he's going to be productive, especially with the recent news of Tyjae Spears' ankle injury that is going to keep him out for the remainder of August and maybe has a chance to be back for week 1. But that was Spears' issue all last year too. It was an excuse that people wanted to make for why there was such a major difference in touches between Tony Pollard and Tyjae Spears last year and why it wouldn't be the case again this year. But now, Spears is already hurt again, will miss a bunch of practice time, and maybe continues having injury issues in season if he's not able to get fully healthy, which all paves the way for Tony Pollard to get off to a hot start and do exactly what he did last year. Except this year, he's probably in a much better offense with Cam Ward at the quarterback position, who looked really good in the first preseason game, leading an 11-play drive at the start of the second quarter that Tony Pollard finished by finding the end zone. So if Pollard replicates his 2024 season but scores 8 times instead of 5 times because his offense is better, that's a top 18 fantasy running back going outside the top 25 right now in the 7th round. That is an easy smash for any 0 RB drafters or just anybody in general looking for their team RB2 or even RB3. Next on the list is actually both Jaguars running backs in Travis Etienne and Tank Bisgby, and I am including both of them because their ADPs are currently 2 rounds apart, that it's easy to draft both guys instead of calling your shot on one of them. The name of the game here is to lean into the uncertainty of the backfield while also believing in the possibilities of this offense under Liam Cohen. The argument for Etienne is very simple. He was the RB17 in 2022 and the RB3 overall in 2023 before a massively disappointing season last year. He wasn't very efficient and he lost rush attempts to Tank Bisgby last year, but the receiving volume was still there for him and should still be there for him in 2025 on top of a much better offensive system, playing with a healthy Trevor Lawrence, not Mac Jones. In fact, if we just look at the 13 games that he played healthy last year, removing the 1 game that he got hurt in and removing the first game that he came back from injury, which were the only 2 games he played under 1/3 of the snaps last year, he would have paced for over 1,000 total yards on almost 240 touches, including almost 50 receptions. He only scored twice all year, which I contribute to the very poor offense that he played in, so his fantasy points per game were really low at 10 PPR points per game, which is a back-end RB3, so still extremely serviceable, but nothing really fantastic. The hope is that Etienne can get back to being a more 3-down player, bump those attempts up a little bit, increase that efficiency, maintain his receiving volume, and score a few more touchdowns. I'm not expecting 2023's performance ever again from Travis Etienne, but a decent top 25 running back is well within his range of outcomes, especially with all the receiving work that he should continue getting. Now on the flip side, the reason that Etienne lost and could continue losing rushing volume is of course because of Tank Bisgby, who looked massively better than Travis Etienne on the ground last year, but is nowhere near the receiver out of the backfield that Travis Etienne is. So that is kind of the trade-off with Tank Bisgby. But if we do the same things that we did with Etienne to Tank Bisgby and look at the 13 games that he played last year, at least 25% of snaps, Bisgby was on pace for 1,000 rushing yards and 9 touchdowns on 215 carries, but only 9 receptions for 70 receiving yards. So he also averages 10 PPR points per game as a back-end RB3 because he's a great rusher, but he's an absolute 0 in the receiving game. Honestly, the most likely outcome in this backfield is that both of these running backs are going to cannibalize each other every week, making it impossible to predict who you should start on any given week. And if you only have one of them, good luck ever feeling confident starting them when they're both healthy. But this is where their ADPs come in and why I'm saying that you should draft both. What you're hoping for is that one of them separates more from the other. You're hoping that Travis Etienne recovers some efficiency on the ground to regain his rushing volume, to pair with his great receiving volume and be more of the RB1 in this backfield. Or you're hoping that Tank Bisgby is just so good on the ground that they can't afford to take him off the field, and he grows into a receiving workload of 20, 25, maybe even 30 receptions. And since they're both cheap enough and going 2 rounds apart in the 9th and 11th rounds, as a 0 RB drafter, you can draft both of them and just find out what happens. Worst case scenario, you're just flipping a coin every single week on who to start. But best case scenario, you get one top 25 guy and you're able to drop the other one for a better player off waivers. This video is presented by Yahoo Fantasy. Fantasy season is in full swing and we here at 4for4 are all over it. We've got drafts firing up, leagues are reuniting, and yes, some early group chat smack talk has already started. This year on 4for4, we are playing on Yahoo Fantasy, and you should too. Whether you're a first-timer or a veteran making your millionth league, I've always been a fan of how intuitive the Yahoo platform is. From draft day to waiver claims, it just works the way you want it to. And to celebrate 28 years of fantasy football greatness, Yahoo Fantasy is dropping 28 big new features over 28 days throughout August. To kick it off, they just dropped Yahoo Fantasy Guillotine Leagues, a killer new way to play fantasy football on Yahoo, where the lowest scoring team gets eliminated each week until there's just one team standing. With the season right around the corner, now is the time to get your league together and give this new mode a try. If you are more into the classics, you can still play in head-to-head private leagues or join a public league. Stay tuned for more killer announcements and start playing on Yahoo Fantasy Football now at yahoofantasy.com/tmap. That's yahoofantasy.com/TMAP. Speaking of shared backfields, now we get to Rhamondre Stevenson of the New England Patriots. Now, I did talk up new rookie TreVeyon Henderson a lot in my last video about running backs with legendary upside, and everything I said holds true, and I love drafting TreVeyon Henderson. But when you get down to this range, especially as a 0 RB drafter, you kind of have to buy into certain narratives or stories for how a season could go for teams. And with Rhamondre Stevenson, the story is pretty much this. He might be the more 2-down running back for most of the season, clear 200 rush attempts, maybe get another 20 to 25 receptions, and with an improved offense, in part because of the addition of TreVeyon Henderson, but also year 2 of Drake May, you add in Stephon Diggs and Kyle Williams at the wide receiver position, Will Campbell to beef up the O-line, we have a new offensive system under Mike Vrabel and Josh McDaniels. Stevenson could be this year's 2022 Jamal Williams or this year's 2022 Zeke Elliott, who scores 10 plus times and is just effective enough on the ground to be a top 25 player. I mentioned in the TreVeyon Henderson video that Josh McDaniels had a double-digit rushing touchdown score 3 years in a row from 2020 to 2022. The 2 Patriots years without Tom Brady, then 1 year in Vegas. In 2020, it was Cam Newton with 12 rushing touchdowns, 10 of which came inside the 5-yard line. In 2021, Damian Harris had 15 rushing touchdowns, where again, 10 of them came inside the 5. And in 2022, Josh Jacobs also had 12 rushing touchdowns, 5 of which came inside the 5, but 8 came inside the 10. The 2021 season is actually a really great example of what Rhamondre Stevenson could be this year. Damian Harris had 200 carries for 900 yards and 15 touchdowns, while a rookie Rhamondre Stevenson that year had 130 carries and 14 receptions, so essentially 150 touches behind the more RB1 Damian Harris. Now, I'm sure that TreVeyon is going to get more receiving work. Actually, Brandon Bolden that year had 50 targets on that same Patriots team, so combine Rhamondre and Brandon Bolden's numbers, give that to TreVeyon just as himself, then he's a 1,300 yard and 8 touchdown running back on 225 touches, 55 of which are receptions, which would have been good for RB18 last year. While Rhamondre plays the more Damian Harris role of almost 1,100 total yards, 15 total touchdowns on 220 touches, which is RB20 in 2024. It's the dynamic duo backfield that we've seen a bunch of times, and it could work in New England this year because both backs are good enough, and the offense might just be good enough for both of these guys to be top 24 running backs this year. Especially early on, on, as TreVeyon Henderson is getting more integrated into the offense and just into the NFL in general, Rhamondre could have a healthy workload to start the season, and then as the season continues going along, TreVeyon gets them inside the 10-yard line, Rhamondre then comes in and scores. Everybody's talking about how great TreVeyon was in the first preseason game, and rightfully so. He deserves all of that hype. But Rhamondre also looked really good in that game. He rushed for 36 yards on just 7 carries, which is over 5 yards per carry, while TreVeyon Henderson had just 1 carry and also had 3 receptions. That to me is more of the split that I am expecting this year, especially like I said, early on to start the season. And not to mention the added upside, if TreVeyon Henderson were to get hurt, which happened twice in the 4 years in college, Rhamondre would have an RB1 weekly ceiling if the New England Patriots offense is actually that good, and he has the backfield to himself with the receiving volume that TreVeyon Henderson has added in. It's a relatively low-cost bet to make in the 10th round of drafts that could pay out really, really well as a low-cost fantasy RB2. But flipping to the other side of a shared backfield and targeting the pass catcher this time, Austin Ekeler in the 12th round is very intriguing for 0 RB drafters or just regular drafters looking for some depth. On the year, Ekeler's season doesn't look great considering that he missed 6 games, but when he did play, he averaged 11 PPR points per game as essentially a top 31 fantasy running back. He was the RB 31 in points per game. He was also very consistent, scoring over 10 PPR points per game in 8 out of 11 games played, and also had a 3-week stretch where he scored 17 plus points per game from weeks 9 through 11, which were games that Brian Robinson missed due to injuries. There really isn't anything else more to say here. It's Austin Ekeler. You're drafting a running back in the 12th round in a great offense with a history of elite production, who is an excellent pass catcher, plays that role extremely well, but then also has some leaky upside, as we saw last year. In case Brian Robinson gets hurt, Austin Ekeler gets a little bit more volume, more touchdown opportunities, and that is how it rolls. Travis Etienne, Tank Bigsby, Rhamondre Stevenson are all kind of gambles for solid weekly production season long, but Austin Ekeler feels extremely safe and consistent if you just need someone to score you some points. Also in the 12th round is a player that I consider to be our first true handcuff running back, an actual backup RB2 on his team, but there is hope and there is some smoke that his role gets bigger this year, and that is Cardinals running back Trey Benson. Personally, I believe that Trey Benson is strictly a handcuff. I don't think he's really going to factor in at all for fantasy football when James Conner is healthy, but I could be wrong because there are a lot of reports coming out of training camp that the Cardinals have 2 RB1s on their team and Trey Benson is going to get more work this year than last year, so maybe this is more of like a 60-40, maybe in a 55-45 split than like a true 70-30 split like it was last year. And to be fair, I would hope that Trey Benson gets more work this year than last year. He only had 69 touches in 13 games played. That is 5 touches per game. So if he increases to 8 touches per game, that is technically more work than he had last year, but also isn't enough work to make him fantasy viable, nor hurt the value and production of James Conner. With that said, we know that James Conner is no stranger to injuries, and even though he did play 16 games last year, he did miss 4 games in 2022 and 2023, and then missed 2 games in Arizona in 2021. That is enough for me to draft Trey Benson as a handcuff in case Conner gets hurt, but then also hope that he's more involved and is viable as a standalone option when James Conner is healthy. That's why Trey Benson is drafted before other handcuffs like Tyler Algier or Ray Davis or Rico Dowdle, because Benson is playing behind a more known and often injured back in James Conner, but then also has the hope for being more than just a handcuff that Algier doesn't have behind Bijan Robinson, that Ray Davis doesn't have behind James Cook, and on and on and on. But speaking of 2 more running backs who are excellent handcuffs with a possibility to be more than that, I also love taking the shots on Braylon Allen and Will Shipley late in drafts, especially if you are a 0 RB drafter. But I actually broke down all the reasons why I love drafting them in my last video, which you guys can check out right up here.